We can't hear you, Bree.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
hmm I noticed I was looking at some of y'all's time cards. Y'all get here so early. I'm so surprised. I would be like still drinking my coffee if I got here that early.
Your mate.
I think in Matthew's case, the mate wakes up first and then goes and says, "Good morning, wake up."
For sure.
Have you tried mate free?
I have not. My mom has some. She got to get her first taste of, I guess, mate whenever she was with Jedi at the SCM conference, and then she got to bring some home, but has not shared with me yet. She's being hateful. I'm about to go to her house and steal it.
Are you closer now to her house that you moved, or not? Not really.
I'm
Are you
like
from?
15 minutes closer, but we're still like an hour and a half away, so it's still a good drive. See who's still waiting.
How many people are we waiting on, Bri?
Like 4.
Okay, just let me know when we can get started then.
We can go ahead and I'll notate who's not in the
Okay,
in the
awesome.
course.
Awesome. And I see that we are recording already. So let's dive right in then. So the idea for today, guys, is to wrap up the training. We'll see another example of a tax return that we have pending from last week. We'll see an example of self-employment with payment statements and also one with profit and loss statements. And then we will wrap up having Carrie talk about tax return transcripts. That is something that came up last week. I think it was with the other team, but we decided to talk a little bit about them and cover them as well. So before I get into the example, I wanted to show you guys something that we added yesterday with Sophie to the cheat sheet so that you guys have access to it. It's still there in the self-employment cheat sheet. So let me actually open it in Microsoft Edge. So now in page 2, if you go to page 2, we've added these two boxes that if you click on them, it will take you to an example of a tax return that is marked up. The one that you guys had so far was one from 2021 that you got back when you were on training. So we updated that. We have one from 2023 that is all highlighted. You have all the explanations to each of the colors. And then we've also added the same thing for a transcript with all the colors and explanations. And Carrie will be talking about this later on in the meeting. But let's dive right into the next tax return that we're going to be covering. And if you guys have any questions, just feel free to raise your hand. You can use the chat as well. Sophie and Carrie will keep an eye on it if any questions pop up. So, any questions before we get started? Anything that was pending from last week that maybe we didn't address?
Nami.
Nope.
No? Okay. So you guys are able to see my screen, right? Am I sharing the right one? You were able to see the cheat sheet before and everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Good. Okay, so let's get started. As usual with self-employment, we will start by taking a quick look at the self-employment declaration and start our notes. So as usual, I'm going to write down the information that I need from the form, the type of employment, the start date that I see that is 2023. So I need to keep in mind that since the tax return is from 2023, I will need to run year-to-date calculations. I'll keep that in mind for later. And then I'm going to write down the anticipated amount as well. And that is basically everything that we need from the self-employment declaration. So let's grab the cheat sheet that I've downloaded so I can cover the steps. We'll go step by step. So the first thing that we've added to the cheat sheet, and that it is a requirement for HOTMA, is to ensure that we have the proof of transmission, that they've actually submitted their taxes to the IRS and everything is in rule. The thing about this is that we don't have it here. Last week with Caro, we actually found out that when an applicant adds self-employment to their application, CertifyMe will ask for the proof of transmission along with the tax return. Those are two extra documents that they need to upload. So you should have it in the file. You will double check that it is there. And since we don't have it here, I'm going to write it in my notes that I will issue a correction about that. So let's keep on going. The first two things, as usual, that we are going to do is we're going to ensure that the name matches the application, and we're going to review the marital status on the tax return. So I see that in the declaration, I see Mika Perry. So let's go into the tax return. This is a worksheet that we can ignore, so we're not going to be paying attention to it. Then we have the 1040 form, and we see that the name of our applicant matches. We have Mika Perry. We see that Mika is actually married and filing with their spouse, that is Emily. So in this case, we would go back to the application, see that that matches, and if it doesn't, we will need to address it with the applicant, as usual. So we can check these two off. We're going to confirm that if there are any dependents, I go to the dependents, there are none, so I can forget about it. And the next thing that we're going to do is check lines 1 through 7 for additional income sources. And if they're not declared as income, we'll need to address them. We're going to be a little bit quicker than last time so that we can get through everything in time. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we can stop for a second and address whatever questions pop up. Okay, so we said that we're going to check lines 1 through 7. So let me grab lines 1 through 7 so we can keep them in here. So let's see what we got here. We're going to pay attention where I see numbers. I see numbers here. What is that? I see that we have wages. Okay, that was a terrible line. There we go. So since we have a couple that are filing their taxes together, just by looking at this, I'm not able to tell if these wages are from both, if the wages are actually from Emily and not from Mika, who is technically self-employed. So I'm going to write it down in my notes so I can get this addressed if it's not listed on the application. If we go back to the application and we see that one of them actually reported having a normal employment, then we don't have to worry about it. But I'm going to write it down for now. Okay. Then I keep going down. I see another number that is the same one as this one. Let's see what this is. And it says at lines 1A through 1H, meaning this is a total, so we can ignore this. Comes from up here. And then I see two numbers here. So let's pay attention to these. I see pensions and annuities in 5A, and then there is a taxable amount. This 5.8 will be the gross amount for pensions and annuities, and the taxable amount is the net. But does that matter to us? Not really. What we want to pay attention to is that there are pensions and annuities listed there. So we would compare it the same thing as for wages. We're going to compare it to the application. If nothing is listed there, we're going to talk to the applicant. We're going to find out what's going on. So I'm going to write it down. Am I making sense so far?
Yes. So
Yes.
if we can see a pension on the tax return, we also need, just asking to confirm, we also need the letter, the annual letter
Exactly.
for pension. Perfect.
Exactly. If they confirm that they do have a pension or annuity, they will need to add it to the application, and then they will need to give you the award letter, statement, and we will need to verify them as with normal pensions or annuities. Same thing for wages. If they haven't added them and they are still employed, they will need to add it to the application. They will need to submit pay stubs, and you will do the normal proceedings for employment. Good question, Mati. So far so good. Do we move forward to the next step?
Yes.
So we can check this one off. We saw that there are no capital gains in this case, so we're going to ensure now that the occupation on page 2 matches Schedule C and self-employment declaration. So let's go to page 2 then. I see here that the occupation for Mika is host. And then for Emily, we see that the occupation here is student. So this may bring us a red flag. So we're going to go back to the application and see if Emily is a full-time student. And we're going to ask them if they are listed as not student. We are going to address that difference. Okay, so far so good. Am I making sense? Okay, so let's write this down in my notes as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's about the last part when, for example, if they put in the application that they receive a pension and but not in the tax return, they put or they send the letter and everything, but they don't put in the tax return that they receive a pension. Is that a problem or?
Not really. There is a chance, and Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a chance that they started receiving the pension in 2024, and that could be a reason why it's not reflected on the 2023 tax return.
Okay, but if they receive in 2023, it must be here in the tax return, the pension.
It should be there. Yeah, that's a great question. It should be on the tax return, but if it's not a concern to us.
Okay.
And I'll explain this a little bit. People can, these tax returns are prepared by humans and they can and will make errors. If we find or see an error on their tax return, it's not up to us to ask them to get the tax return revised. We may just ask them to clarify it or explain it. So yeah, we will sometimes see errors where they filed their tax return incorrectly.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So we've already written down about Emily being a student. So let's compare the occupation that Mika has here of being a host. But then if we go back to the self-employment declaration, we see that Mika is actually a freelance musician. So that may raise up the question, or not a question. We're going to need to clarify this with Mika to see what this difference is about. So let's take a quick look also to the Schedule C. That is something that the cheat sheet also tells me to check. So let's look for the Schedule C pretty quickly. I see Schedule C for Mika. That says musician 2. Doesn't say that Mika is a host, so we're going to leave that in our notes, just to clarify with Mika. Then let's see if there's another Schedule C. There's another one. This one is for Emily, who is a musician. And that brings another question to, is Emily actually self-employed now? Is she a musician? We'll take a look at the rest of the Schedule C in a minute, but we would go back to the application, go to Emily's section of the applications, see if Emily reported being self-employed as well. If she didn't, we will issue a clarification asking Emily if she's still self-employed. If she still is, then she will need to add it to the application, provide us with whatever means we need, and well, we have the tax return already, but she will need to answer the questions, and we will get the self-employment declaration with everything we need. Am I making sense so far? Same. So then what we're going to do is we're going to leave this host occupation to clarify with the applicant. We're going to get in touch with them and ask them about this. Caro.
Yeah, Lou, so if Emily says, yes, I'm self-employed, we would have to issue a new correction saying, please edit this on your application, because she has to change it on her application, and then keep on going with all of the with the declaration, and well, we have the tax return. But we would have to issue a correction, because we can't do it over the I mean, she has to change that on her application, right?
That is a really good question. So probably the best idea, just to make it quicker, and if Bree and Carrie want to correct me later, feel free to do so. Probably you can jump on a call with Emily. If they are still self-employed, you will issue the correction to add it. And if she's not anymore, then you can have her write you a clarification to your email and add to the file that she's not self-employed anymore. Just to make it quicker. Carrie and Bree, would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Awesome. Does that answer the
Thank
question,
you.
Caro?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So we've checked the occupation. Then we have one last point in the Form 1040, which is check the tax return if it has a bank account listed and has not been disclosed. It will need to be addressed. So let's go back to Form 1040 then. 40 page 2. Just remember that we usually take a look at the refund section. So I see that there is a bank account listed, there is a checking. So I would go back to the application, I'll see if they have a checking account listed. If you're verifying assets, you should have the bank statements, so you will be able to check the account number, the last four, to see if it is the same one. If it's not, then they will need to add it to the application. If you're not verifying assets, as long as you see a checking account in the application, that's enough. The problem would be if here you see a checking account and then in the application there is a savings. Any differences will need to be addressed, but if you're not verifying assets and you have a checking here and a checking in the application, that's enough. Okay. So let's assume that we're not verifying assets and Emily has a checking account and Mika has a checking account as well. So we're not going to ask about it. And that would be everything for the 1040 form. Any questions about this?
Just a quick question about that, Lucio. We have some applicants that they don't want to share personal information with us. Is it okay if they just scratch the numbers for their bank account on the tax return?
So, Carrie, you want to jump in for that?
Yeah, good question. It's fine. I wouldn't feel comfortable giving my routing and account number to some stranger, so it's totally fine if they cross through those. Same thing with like their social security numbers. If they cross through those or black them out, that's fine as well.
Okay, thanks.
But if they do, I'm sorry. But if they do need if we do verify assets, we do need that account, right? I mean the statement of
Yes.
those accounts.
And the nice thing about most bank statements is it'll only show the last 4 or 5 account numbers. Whereas this tax return shows the whole thing. I mean, it would be so easy for somebody to hack into their account. So yeah, a bank statement will just show the last couple digits.
Thanks, Carrie.
Awesome. So are we good with the form 1040? Are we okay to move forward into the next schedule?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so let's take a look at the schedule 1. The first two things that the cheat sheet asks me is to look for the income listed in lines 3 and or 5, and that those lines should match line 10 in the schedule 1 as well. So let's check that out. So we have line 3 here. So let me highlight it. So we have it here. We don't have anything in line 5. We see that here in line 3, we have a negative amount. So, trivia question, would we use the negative amount on the tick, or how would we list it?
0?
Exactly. Thank you, Mati. It would be 0. So, let's check if this line 3 actually matches line 10. So let's go down to the bottom. Remember that line 10 combines all the lines above. So if they don't match, it means that there is something, some sort of income bothering me here and making a difference. So we see 5647 and 5647. So they both match. We can scan through everything here. We see that there are no additional income sources. So we should be good so far. So we have checked this and checked this one too. We checked all the additional lines as well. And then it tells me that line 10 should match line 8 of the 1040 form. So line 10, negative 5647 should match line 8 if the 10 in the 1040 form. I'm here back in the 1040. So I go to line 8 here. Let me highlight it for you guys to see it. Change the color. And I see that that number actually matches 5647. Okay. Any questions about the schedule 1? So far, so good. And as you guys see, the only thing that I'm doing is I'm going down the list. I have everything that I need to look for here in the cheat sheet. I don't have to think too much about it. The cheat sheet will remind you what to do and what to look for in each form. So let's get to the famous Schedule C and check it out. The first thing that we're meant to check, and we've done this already, is that the business type should match the application and the self-employment declaration. Let's look for the Schedule C. Here, we see that Mika listed being a musician. In the self-employment declaration, if you guys remember, we see that it was a freelance musician, so that's fine. It doesn't have to be the exact same words. But if you guys remember, in the 1040 form, we already saw that Mika listed host, and that's something that we'll clarify later. We already written that down. So once having checked this, we know that the Schedule C is the proof of self-employment, and line 31 is the net income from self-employment for our notes. And then we should also check the start date to see if we need to annualize the amount. So let's check it out then. So I'll look for line 31. I'm going to highlight it. I see that it is a negative amount. So I'm going to list it in my notes, just like Mati said, since we're not using negative amounts in the tick, I'm going to write it as 0. And we're going to have the verification data as pending, since we still need the proof of transmission. Okay. Now, my question is, just by looking at my notes, what I have here, is there anything that I would need to ask the applicant? Any differences that you may see? Am I able to zoom in this? There we go.
Applicant is declaring 10,000 annually, and we have 0.
Exactly, Matias. So the thing is, our applicant is anticipating $10,000, while they, in 2023, in the last year, they actually lost money as being self-employed. So what we're going to ask is, we're going to ask the applicant why they anticipate 10,000 when they actually made 0 in the last year. You're going to phrase it better. There is a common correction for that. But if once they clarify and they say that now in 2024 they got a bunch of clients and business is booming and everything is great, and once they clarify that they will make these $10,000 that they anticipate, you can use that amount for the tick. Once we have that clarification. Any questions about that? Good. Okay. If we remember a few minutes ago, we actually saw that there is another Schedule C that was for Emily. We already written down in our notes that we're going to ask Emily. Oh, I never wrote it down actually. That's my bad. If she's still self-employed We saw that she is a musician. So let's check out in line 31 how much she actually made. We see that she actually didn't make any money. So it's 0. So we want that clarification if Emily is still being self-employed or not, and that would be it. Okay. If she says yes, then she should add it to the application. We'll answer the questions and we'll have the self-employment declaration. And we'll most likely have to ask why she anticipates something more than just 0, which is what was verified. Any questions so far about the Schedule C? Am I making sense? Okay. Okay. Let's go back to the cheat sheet then. Since we saw that we have negative amounts, we don't need to annualize them. Once they, let me pull up actually the calculation sheet. Once Mika actually clarifies that they do anticipate $10,000, more like a formality, we can throw those $10,000 in a calc sheet in the annual amount, just to kind of keep record of it and make it easier for NextGen and also the properties to have a record of how much they are anticipating. But this is more like a formality since it's not really calculating anything at all. It's just printing those 10K there for us to have there. So let's go back to the cheat sheet and see the last step. So here it tells me that line 31 should match line 3 of the Schedule 1. And we already checked that line 3 of the Schedule 1 matched line 8 of the 1040, but we want to know if line 31 matches line, sorry, I already forgot the number, line 3. So we see that lines 31 of both Schedule Cs should add up together a number that matches what we have in Schedule 1. So since the only amount that we have is this negative amount in Mika's Schedule C, if we go back and look for the Schedule 1, we see that it is the same negative amount, negative 56.47. And let me show you again, negative 56.47. So it matches. Okay. Any questions about this?
Lucio, I have a question. I'm sorry about my questions. But why do we have a negative number over there? Why is not just 0?
That is a really
If
good.
they are not making money.
That's a good amount. That's a good question. I mean, Carrie, do you want to jump in since you know more about tax returns?
Sure. For our taxes, not for the tax credit program, but for our taxes, if they have multiple self-employment or multiple businesses, they can use the loss from one business to offset the income of another. So that's why on the actual tax return, it'll always show the actual negative amount, because if this person had earned $10,000 in income from a second business, they could offset that. They could subtract the 5 from that 10 and therefore have to pay less taxes. That's just for the tax return, though. For like Lucio pointed out in the beginning, for us, a negative is a 0 on a tax return. But essentially, new businesses often have a loss for the first year or two until they get up and running. When you first start, I like to think of it like a restaurant. When you first start a restaurant, that first year, you've got tons of expenses. You're setting up, you're buying the cooking stuff, the food, you've got no customers. So you might show a loss on your tax return for a year or two until things kind of take off.
Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, we have already gone through everything in the cheat sheet, there is no Schedule E in this case. So let's take a quick peek at the rest of the forms to see if we find anything weird, just very quickly. This is the other Schedule C. We have some detailed reports that we can skip, some extra forms. And this is something that I wanted to bring up, that there are education credits for them in the tax return. Since the correction already came up since Emily listed student as the occupation, so we're going to have this addressed. But if Emily, for some reason, listed musician as the occupation, going pretty quickly through the rest of the forms may help you find the education credit. So we would know that at the very least in 2023, if there is an amount here, it would mean that they were at least full-time students in 2023, and we would compare it to the application. Does that make sense at all? Those faces. Some of you want to run away. I see it in your faces. I know you guys. But that is pretty much everything that we have in the tax return. There are a lot of checklists and some detail sheets that we don't really care about, and some forms that we don't need to look through. But basically, let me wrap up the idea, Lola, and I'll let you ask the question. As long as you're following the steps in the tax return cheat sheet, you should be fine. Like, you will find whatever needs to be found. Lola?
Something got my attention. I noticed that the signatures on the page 2 were completed online, like they were not signed on hand. Can we accept that?
That is a really good question. So as long as, since now we need to have the proof of transmission, if the page 2 of the 1040 form is not signed nor dated, it doesn't matter. We need to have the proof of transmission. That's why we actually removed that step from the cheat sheet. Since you need to have, because of HOTMA regulations, they need to have the proof of transmission. That will be our verification date. The thing is, if it is too old, which could happen that the proof of transmission is dated more than 120 days prior, then as your verification date, you could use the tenant consent form signature date. Does that answer the question properly, Lola?
It does, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions about the tax return? No? Okay. But we may go over a little bit. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, perfectly fine.
Awesome. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the other examples that we have. We have one with pay statements that we're going to be looking at. This is for Uber. So let's prepare our notes with the self-employment declaration first. So I see that they do Uber and their start date is actually in 2024. So it makes sense that they don't have the tax return available. I'm going to write down how much they anticipate as well. Now, since the tax return is not available, I see that they have completed the current calendar year information. Okay, so trivia question, first of all, and you can pull up the cheat sheet also and look for the answer there. When we don't have the tax return, what do we need to ask the applicant?
For a profit and loss statement.
Yeah, I mean, we need supporting documentation. What else?
We need
There
to
at the
have
bottom
this
says everything.
Mm,
to notarize the form.
exactly. Good, Mati. We need to have the self-employment declaration notarized, and we're missing one thing.
A clarification
Exactly. For what?
why he's not issuing a tax return.
Exactly. Thank you, David. So the thing about this, since we see the start date, there is a chance that we can actually ask via phone the applicant, and since they started in 2024, we can actually prepare the clarification ourselves for management, writing down that since they started being self-employed in 2024, they don't have this self-employment in their taxes. Is that correct, Carrie? Is that what we talked about yesterday?
Say that again, Lou. I'm sorry.
About us issuing the clarification for management on why the tax return is not available.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's great. And let me explain because let me make it clear for this group as well, because I think the other team was a little confused there. So you guys may have been as well. When they can't provide a tax return, a management clarification is preferred. So we don't have to get a self-declaration or an email from the applicant. We actually want you guys to write that clarification. And we talked about yesterday, like in this example, Desiree, I don't know how to say that name. Desiree, she became self-employed in 2024. She's not going to provide her tax return for 2023 because it's not going to reflect that self-employment income. So it's self-explanatory. You guys don't even need to reach out to the applicant in this scenario. You can just proactively write that management clarification saying she didn't provide her tax return because she wasn't self-employed last year. You don't even need to ask her any questions. If it says she was self-employed in 2023 or 2022 and is not providing a tax return, then you'd need to ask her to explain, pick up the phone, call her, ask for that explanation, and then still write that on a management clarification.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. So we're going to write down in our notes the things that we need to have. So we're going to separate the clarification for management that we can do ourselves, just like Carrie explained. And then we will ask the applicant to have these the self-employment declaration notarized. Those are the main two things that we're going to get. So just like Caro said, we need to have some sort of supporting documentation. In this case, we have statements from Uber that we're going to look for. If we go to the cheat sheet, we have actually a page that talks about that. See, we have the steps, the 3 things that we need to have when the tax return is not available. So we talked about this one, we talked about the clarification as well. And then one thing that we need to do as well is run the year-to-date calculations with the information from the self-employment declaration. So we have some information here in the self-employment declaration. These are the things that we're going to use to run year-to-date calculations. So let's do that pretty quickly. And in this case, it's pretty simple since basically we're going to plug them in the calc sheet in the same order here as they are. Let me clear up the calc sheet just in case. So let's go down to the year-to-date calculations. We're going to use the new hire. So I'm just going to grab those dates and that amount, plug it in here, and we should get the annualized amount for what they reported here in the self-employment declaration. And we still need to go through the documentation. This is a previous step. Okay, so let's plug in everything that we have here. And then we have the annualized amount from the self-employment declaration. So I'm going to throw this in my notes as well. 849 with 62. And then we can just throw in here in parentheses self-employment declaration so that we know what this amount actually is. So we can check off this box. We have pretty much everything here. So now we're going to get into the documents. There is a page in the cheat sheet as well, if we scroll all the way down to page 7, that explains about detailed payment histories or stubs in self-employment. And there are a few key points that we need to follow, like for example, that we're going to use the payments as normal stubs, but we're going to use the net amounts. We're going to run year-to-date calculations with the information from the self-employment declaration, which we have already done. And we are not going to ask about low or high stubs, but we will ask about stub variations. And we have the example here. So let's do that pretty quickly then. If we come here to the first statement, we see here that we actually have a weekly statement. We see that we have some earnings here, that this would be the gross amount because there are some refunds and expenses down below. And then we have the payout and how much is transferred to their account, which is the net amount, since we're using the net for self-employment. Am I making sense so far? Okay. So let's plug it in the calc sheet then. We'll see how this, what happens here. So let's use the stub one. Let's pretend that we're doing this file for a property that follows Hotman regulations. So we're going to use 2 statements. We saw that it is a weekly statement. So the number of pay periods for this will be 52. And I'm going to plug in the date, the end date here, which is May 20th. And the net amount, which is 409 with 80 cents. And there's no year-to-date in these statements. Am I making sense so far? Any questions until this point? Okay. So let's keep on going then. We have the rest of the pages that we are not going to worry about a lot. But remember that we need to make sure with all the documents that we have all the pages, as with any documents, and how you guys have learned from the beginning of time since you've been in the team. Then we have the next statement. We see that we have the end date. We see that there is a gross amount. We have some expenses and events from previous weeks. And we have the payout here that we're going to plug in the calc sheet. Okay, so let's plug it in. We see that the end date of the statement is May 27th. And then I'm going to plug in the amount. And then we have the amount calculated for these statements. So I can throw it in here in my notes, which is the highest amount, and will be listed in the tick as well. And we have the verification date pending, since they still need to have the self-employment. Okay, there we go. They still need to have the self-employment declaration notarized. Any questions about this?
Me again. Lucio, about the self-employed form,
Mhm.
we can receive that one notarized just if they just started this year. And can we receive it if they don't know how to get the tax return? And it's easier to make the form and notarize?
So let me see if I got the question right. So basically, like, if they are not able to provide a tax return, they will always need to have the self-employment declaration notarized. The only cases where they would not is if they are submitting the tax return.
My question is because I don't know how easy it is to find or get the tax return. I don't know if to make or complete this form and have it notarized is easier than go and look for the tax return.
Well, as usual, and when it comes to self-employment, the first preference is having the tax return.
Okay.
I don't want to, Carrie, do you want to add something to that?
No, you're spot on. It might be easier, but regulation, the tax credit program prefers and wants the tax return. So if the tax return's available, we have to use it and we have to go that route.
Because I believe in some properties, the applicant can just have it notarized with them, with the property management, or I don't know. But that is because of my question.
Good. Yeah, the first preference will always be the tax return. Then if they haven't filed for their taxes, or if they started being, like in this case, they started being self-employed in 2024. So even if they did file for their taxes, since they started in this year, this Uber driver gig is not going to be displayed in the tax return since it's for the previous year. So in this case, we're going to need the applicant to provide some sort of statements, and they will need to have the self-employment declaration notarized. Okay. Any questions about these? No? Okay. Let's look at one last example before giving the podium to Carrie to talk about the transcripts. So here we have another self-employment file, and we're going to take a quick look at the at the profit and loss statement. So let's prepare our notes pretty quickly. So we have here that they are a contractor assistant. And the start date is also in 2024. So we know that they don't have the tax return. So we're going to talk to them. We're going to prepare that, the clarification for management after talking to them. And we see that they have an anticipated amount of $12,000 that we're going to write down in our notes. So we have this form notarized already since I took this from a full file. we're going to run year-to-date calculations for this information that we have on the cheat sheet. And let me do this pretty quickly. This is the same thing that we just did with the other case. So let's do this pretty quickly. So I'm going to go to the new hires row and plug in those dates first, and then the amount. And I have here the annualized amount for the self-employment declaration. And this is the same thing that I did in the beginning of the other example. Any questions until this point? Am I making sense? Okay, good. Good. So now let's get into the good stuff, and we're going to take a good look at the profit and loss statement that we have in this case. So this one is the profit and loss statement that came out a couple of months ago. This is the one that they are able to complete themselves. We also have the financial, and I forgot the full name of that one. I have it here, the financial statement of net income, which is pretty similar, but it's completed with an accountant. But in the cheat sheet, we also have the profit and loss statement marked up here. And we also have the steps so that we can run our calculations. But let's take a quick look at what we have here. We see the self-employment income amount here. We have also a commencing date and ending date for the period. We have a gross amount. Remember that we don't care about the gross amount when it comes to self-employment, so I'm going to ignore this for now. They will list their expenses, which in this case, there are none. So just for this case, the gross and the net will match. But normally there should be some expenses, and we will be paying attention to that net amount at the end. Does that make sense? Any questions about this? Now, a trivia question for you guys. Can I just this amount and throw it in my notes, or am I meant to calculate something with this? What should I do?
I think you should calculate it because it depends on the dates that you have here listed.
Exactly, Gato. Nice answer. So we have a date. So we know for a fact that this $2,137 that Ethan made is only from April the 2nd to May the 18th. And this is not our Ethan. It wouldn't be fair if Ethan was actually making this and making more than all of us. Okay, so let's do that pretty quickly. And so let's go. We're going to annualize it here. And this is pretty simple as well. I'm going to delete everything else from here. So I'm going to plug in the dates, which are pretty similar to what we have in the self-employment declaration. The dates are slightly different for like 2 dates. I think the end date for this one was May 16th, so it's a little bit different against 18th. So they are going to be a little bit different, and we'll stick to the one that is the highest. So 37. So I see that I have here an amount that is pretty similar. 913.85. And then I get this here, profit and loss statement. And the verification date will be the one from the self-employment declaration that has been notarized. So let's go back there. And I see the date right there. And with that, you will calculate the OMIDA if you have to, and all of that good stuff that you would normally do. Any questions about this? About the profit and loss statement? Okay. Again, as a reminder, everything that we talked about today, everything that I've done with you guys in the meeting, it's here in the cheat sheet. Just a matter of pulling it up and using it. You have the tax return steps, how to annualize the Schedule C, which we talked about last week. This was added as well. We have some notes. When the tax return is not available, we have everything we talked about just a couple of minutes ago. The financial statement of net income, which it's pretty rare since you need an accountant for that, but then you have the profit and loss statement and the payment histories that we talked about today. Okay. Do we have any questions about this? Okay. Okay, Carrie, do you want to talk about the transcripts then?
Sure, I would love to. If anybody needs to go, I know we're gonna go. I won't be long, but if y'all need to go, just remember the meeting's being recorded. You can watch it later. All right. So as Lucio mentioned, one of the requirements with tax returns is that we need proof of transmission. We have to. The applicant has to provide proof of transmission, and that means that they need to provide us something showing that they submitted that tax return to the IRS, to the government that reviews the tax returns. We went over yesterday, we had a training and Brianna was there, and we provided her with some examples of what proof of transmission will look like. So I'm sure she'll go over those with you in the next couple weeks or so. But what will end up happening is there will be times where your applicant cannot provide you with that proof. And if they can't provide you with that proof, the only other alternative is for them to provide us with this document that I've got on the screen. It's called a tax return transcript. And this is a report provided by the IRS, and it proves that the tax return was transmitted to the IRS. So picture this, you've got an applicant. Most of us, these tax returns are too hard to file ourselves, so most of us will pay some sort of other agency to help us file our tax returns. But if you don't want to pay that money, you're more than welcome to attempt to file it on your own. Some applicants will fill out the tax return by hand and send it to the IRS by mail. In that case, they cannot ever provide us proof that it was transmitted to the tax return. They'll need to, or to the IRS, they'll need to get this document for us. And I don't think we showed you guys this in the training last week. If you have applicants that cannot, and this is on the cheat sheet, so you don't need to remember this, but if you have an applicant that is saying they cannot get proof of transmission, they'll need to go to the website for the IRS. They can simply type in IRS transcript. And again, this link is on the cheat sheet, so you don't have to remember any of this. Any person that has filed a tax return can get a transcript right from the IRS website. And it's instant. It's not like it takes days for them to get it. As long as they sign in, gain access to their account, they can instantly obtain this transcript. It is a little challenging because as we just talked about, Matthias, or one of y'all asked about them blacking out the information on their tax return. Tax returns provide a lot of sensitive data. So to get a transcript, I have to prove that I am me. And I think doing those steps usually requires attaching like a driver's license or something to confirm that you are who you say you are. I actually think it takes a picture of you as well. So there are a couple steps involved, but we can easily obtain a transcript at any point in time. So because we've got that requirement for proof of transmission, we may start seeing these transcripts more often from our applicants. And I think I told the other group this, I don't think I told you guys this, but so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But a transcript, to me, is easier to review than a full tax return. Those tax returns that Lucio has been showing you, those are sometimes 20 pages long, whereas this transcript is only 7 pages long. The transcript is like, to me, it's like reviewing a tick. A tick is a summary of everything that was verified in the file. This transcript is a summary of everything that was provided in that tax return. So it's like reviewing a tick versus reviewing an entire file with all of the proof of the income and the assets. So we have this marked up tax transcript that Lucio will share with y'all after the training. So save this for future reference if you struggle with, or if you need to review these. And essentially, we've put the notes on there. The notes are very similar to the markups that you'll see on the tax return. So just a couple, I'll just walk through it with you quickly. We're not going to go through the whole thing in detail. This right here tells me that this is the tax return for 2023. This here is the date they requested the transcript, but again, this is 2023's tax return. Right here on the first page, it will show me oh, beautiful, Sophie. I didn't realize that. Y'all are so smart. This is the person whose tax return I'm reviewing. If they were filing with their spouse would be listed right here. We see their social security number, and then we would see the spouse's social security number there. So same thing as a tax return. If we see a spouse listed, is the spouse included? This section here tells us their filing status. So again, just like we do with a tax return, if they're filing married, what's their marital status on their application? So this person is single. Here's where any dependents would be listed. Same thing. If there are dependents listed here, are they being included as household members? Oh, yeah, good point, Lucio. With this transcript, we don't need separate proof of transmission. This is acceptable proof of transmission and the tax return itself. Then we've got some colors, the exact same as the tax return. On the tax return, the same note, anything in pink, those are additional possible income sources that may need to be addressed. The difference with a transcript, if you remember on a tax return, all that pink is grouped together and listed first. It's a little different on our tax return. You'll notice that the pink continues down here. But again, it's very obvious. This is wages. If there's wages here and they didn't report wages on their application, that needs to be addressed. This is where Social Security would show up or other income. Here's where if they have a pension, if there's an amount listed there, just like a tax return, it would need to be addressed. The green, same thing with the tax return. The green is a potential gain or a loss, meaning that's an asset that they sold. So that's, if there's an amount there, that's a potential asset that needs to be addressed. Oh, sorry, Carolina, go ahead.
No, it's fine, Carrie. I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to mention that I think you mentioned that these are a little bit different, right? One from another.
Mm-hmm. Yes, good point. That's a great point. Just like a tax return will look different from one person to the next, the transcript will look a little different potentially. And I'll explain one of the big differences. Good question. So green is a potential asset, and then blue, that is our self-employment income. So you can see here for this person, they have self-employment income. We've got a negative amount here on the tax return and then, or the transcript. And then they also have a gain or a loss, and it's a loss. Now, no, I'm going to scroll through this transcript. There's a lot of extra information on here, but as you can see, nothing is highlighted. So I'm ignoring all of this information. Just like on a tax return, there are multiple pages that we just completely ignore. I'm ignoring all of these sections until I get to the highlighted information. Here is the summary of the Schedule C. So on a transcript, instead of having a separate attachment for the Schedule C, it's just reflected here in the body of the form. So here's our quote unquote Schedule C. We could still use the cheat sheet to kind of review this. What are we looking for on a Schedule C? We're looking to see the type of business or the source of the self-employment. We're comparing that to what they declared on the self-employment declaration. We're looking for the net profit. This is our self-employment income. It's a negative, so it will be a 0. There could be, just like on a tax return, we could have multiple Schedule Cs. The same applies to a transcript. We would just see it start over again. So here's the Schedule C. If there were 2 self-employment amounts, we would see another Schedule C reflected here. And then here's that Schedule D. Remember on the transcript right here, the green indicates that there should be a Schedule D attached. We'll scroll all the way back down, ignoring all that extra information. Here's our Schedule D, indicating that they sold an asset. And then there's one more red flag that we're going to look at. Remember, there's no markups, no highlighting here. We're going to ignore this section. Here's where potential educational credits would be reflected. Lucio just showed us that on a real tax return. If there were an amount listed here, education credits, it would indicate that our applicant is or was a student, which could be a red flag. That's it, y'all. They're way easier than tax returns. So if you get a tax transcript, let it make you nervous. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier than reviewing a full actual tax return. Any questions there? Awesome. All right, that's it for me. Next week, we're going to go over real estate, which is exciting. You'll be stuck with me next week. I'm going to lead your training for next week. But Lucio did an amazing job today. Thank you so much, Lucio. We will let y'all get back to work. Thank you all. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Thanks,
See
Blue.
you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jerry.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye,
Bye.
guys.